And welcome back to the Sleeping Grush podcast. I'm Matt.
And I am, once again, still John.
Oh, well, hello, John. It's good to meet you. And celebrating a birthday today, we have our producer, Jager Madsen. Happy birthday, Jager.
Who is somewhere between 13 and 27, but we don't know for sure.
There's a pretty good range on that, yeah. He may be out past his bedtime. We're not quite sure.
I just served him alcohol, so we're probably in a lot of trouble.
What does that finger mean? I'm not sure.
He thinks it's a mule. It's really a Shirley Temple. Maybe we're kind of right, but
We are brought to you today by Cardboard Corner Cafe, whose October specials are Pumpkin Spice Waffle, Southwest Breakfast Waffle, the Pumpkin Spice Chai, and the Blueberry Boba Green Tea Lemonade. Cardboard Corner, eat, drink, game. All right. Well,
we're doing two of those.
We
I might even eat so that we get a trifecta.
Awesome. Today, I want to start out by welcoming our listeners from Miso's Game Room in Louisville, Kentucky. And John, you and Julie were there over the weekend. You want to fill us in on what went on there?
I do. We had a great time. So we've had a long association with this game group. And that includes the daughter of one of the gamers, Audrey Nethery, Scott Nethery's daughter, who has diamond black fan anemia, DBA, very rare condition. And she's a hero. She's my hero. Deals with it very well. One of the nicest, most pleasant people I ever meet. And the first time we went down several years ago was the same type of event as this weekend, a fundraiser for DBA. So it's gaming weekend, but all of the things that they do, the charity raffle and the event tickets, the money goes to research.
That's awesome.
So we were going back down there, and I will admit, I just didn't have the biggest expectations in terms of huge sales. It was an opportunity to see Scott, hopefully see Audrey, which I'll tell you turned out well. See the new game store that they're playing at. Maybe make some new friends, see some old ones. Also honor Jesse Copeland.
Yes.
Longtime member of that group, great Free Blades player, multiple coin holder, who passed away, a law enforcement officer who passed away from cancer some time ago. And we made a model in his honor, the field warden.
Awesome model.
Yeah, for the Kazarek, which we got his friends together and asked them kind of collectively. Kevin kind of managed that for us, but kind of surveyed the group. What do you think he would have liked, in terms of who to be in the world? And his likeness, photograph was used by the sculptor and the artist to make the model. So we were going to see all these guys, all these folks down there. And it just blew our expectations out of the water. Chris's store, Miso's Game Room, is amazing. Miso's his Frenchie, his dog. We will probably be making a Frenchie somehow, some way in Phelan in the next year or two. Fantastic. It's a collectibles place. It's Miso's Collectibles and Game Room, or Game Room and Collectibles. It's a full title, and it's mostly collectibles with a really, really great game space. But the shelf space is mostly just collectibles. I don't know anything about that. I'm looking at all these things like beautiful 2-foot tall Boba Fett's, is the plural Fett's?
Sure.
Whatever. Fettum. So,
do you speak basic?
I do. Yeah. No. Michael Keaton Batmans and Batman. And all these Funko Pops all over the place. And Chris is was in that world as a collector. He's a veteran that, got out of that and did something else for a while and said, I really want to open a game store. And here he is. Just a great place to hang out and play, just with great people in it. We went with product on consignment like we normally do because he wasn't carrying us at the time. We'll get to that. And participated in the charity auction and ran a regular, Julie's world famous booth demo, the 15-minute demo. And I had a full 4x4 table set up to run a full game demo. And we ended up with, tell a couple quick stories. We ended up with a great quester out of that area. Questers that had been, here's what it really was. It was a mixture of the people that had been playing Free Blades in the past, the group of people around Kevin and Phil and Jesse Scott that had been playing in the past, and they kind of fallen off, and they were moving around game stores because things were changing in the environment. And this was kind of designed to kind of bring that back in, which it worked. But also, we gained a bunch of new players and a quester for the area who really wanted to be active, and we kind of changed hands on that front. So we had a mix. When we left, we had a mix of new players talking to established players. And the new players, I'm really excited about this. What faction should I buy? And the established players like, oh, I haven't had my Khazark out in a year. I need to get back into this. And then a very, very active quester, beating the heck out of Jeff for all the answers on what kind of events to run and how do I get support and all those great things. There's already a schedule of Free Blades games. They're going to roll right into Voices of Dust. That's amazing. Great. The timing of that's perfect, right? So Nevadim, the campaign setting comes out 1st of November. Sometime after that, the fall-winter campaign, and these guys will just roll right into it after playing some practice games.
That's awesome, and we'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks as we get closer to that.
Yep, absolutely. And then, so one other little funny story is, so Chris, the store owner, normally when we have one of these game days, we bring a bunch of products so people that are interested in the game can get some at a store where it doesn't carry us. Like, for example, when we go out to Griffin's Lair in a couple of weeks, they're already a retail partner.
Right.
So we're not bringing product. We're just going out there to help put on a game day. So we sell in consignment, and then maybe they get into it. It really depends on their gauge and the response. Well, the response was lights out, right? So we had this beautiful space. We had like an 18-foot table, and at the end of it was Julie's 15-minute demo. I was in the tournament room. I was in a different room with the 4x4. And then product was all laid out in big display, all the starter boxes and all the, the first things you'd buy, the spell forms, the first hero you get, that kind of thing. Templates, tokens, dice, all laid out. And so at the end of the evening, like 8 o'clock, Julie goes to Chris, like we always do, and says, okay, we want to settle up. Is there anything you want to purchase as a retailer, right? And Chris says, yeah, actually I do. I very much do. And he starts grabbing some things off the table, making a little stack. But the way he said it, I don't think Julie caught was, let me see what I don't want, or something like that. So I knew that what he was doing was setting aside the few things he wasn't going to buy. Right. So he had this little pile, and he set it aside. And of course, there's still 15 feet of product, right? And says, okay, let's settle up, And so Julie sits down next to the little pile of stuff and gets out her laptop and starts to record what she thinks he's buying. I'm like, no, you don't understand. That's what he's not taking, because he knows the crew's already bought into those things. Right. What he wants is everything else.
Awesome.
Right? So,
poor Julie.
Yeah. And so one of the single best, retailer interactions that we've ever had,
That's fantastic.
In terms of, so he's stocked. So Miso's is stocked. We're already getting orders for the stuff he doesn't carry from the players there. They're going to him first, buying whatever, then either ordering through him, so he's recommending, or coming directly to.
Awesome. So if you're in the Louisville, Kentucky area, stop by Miso's Collectibles and Game Room.
Yep. And you have a Louisville channel on Discord.
Right.
And Zach Scott, our new quester for that area, is very active there already, and that's the person to kind of what's happening, what's the next event, when can I get a game in?
Awesome.
It's a place to go. But it was amazing. And Audrey showed up Saturday night.
Sweet.
Yeah. So the charity auction is and once again, I am disappointed in her. She couldn't pull one of my tickets out of the bag on Sunday afternoon. Because I really wanted that Reaper paint set. But so we contributed, some starter boxes to the charity auction. One of those where you have the items laid out and you put little bags behind them and you dump your tickets in the bag, however many tickets.
Yeah.
And the money goes to DBA Research. So she shows up on Sunday to be the one to pull all the tickets out of the bag. So we didn't think we were going to get to see her. But for those of you who've been around a while, we made a model in her honor.
Yes.
Which is the Wild Wing.
An awesome model.
That she helped us make. Mm-hmm. She worked with us to tell us what she wanted. And there is a video of younger Audrey. She's a freshman in high school, man.
That's insane.
It's crazy. Okay. Of younger Audrey. And she's out there. If you Google her name, you're going to see her. Rachel Ray.
Yep.
Singing, lip syncing Iron Maiden, dancing Zumba. She's just an amazing.
It's so funny because when we first came into that organization and were asked to come over and put on some demos and things several years ago, I knew who that was because I'd seen her video.
Right? Yeah.
Right? It's awesome.
So we have a video of her from one of the events from several years ago where she did her own interpretation of all 5 wing dances the Wild Wing puts on.
Right. That's an awesome
As
video.
far as I'm concerned, that's canon. I mean, if we ever have one of our bards doing, Dance to the Bat, they better be doing it just like Audrey did.
That's right.
I'm not gonna be happy. So it was amazing to see her. And of course,
Yeah.
several years have passed, but she's, just an amazing, amazing woman. So it was a great time. And
Cool.
now we have a whole other community, either however you look at it, re-engaged, fired up, growing,
Right.
and another game store to add because, the one we're working with has gone out of business or changed locations.
Right.
So, yeah. So
cool. And you mentioned
Amazing.
that you'll be at Griffin's Lair in a few weeks. Tell me about that.
Okay, so Griffin's Lair is a store that's both in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania and Erie, Pennsylvania.
Right.
We have an active quester at the Pittsburgh store. Julie and I are going out to put out a game day at the Erie store.
Okay.
Coincidentally, there's a Pittsburgh Steelers home game the Sunday of that weekend.
Total coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Just stars aligned,
Right.
So, but we will be, we're going to be putting on games at the Erie store, then going out to dinner that night with Casey and Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Casey and Sue, O'Donovan, one of our, super good friends, Free Blades players, help us out at ReaperCon.
Like ReaperCon, yeah.
Events
Yeah.
for us. Please put on events at Adepticon. Just a
Fantastic work there.
great people. So Julie and I will be going out to dinner with them, and then we're going to the game with the store owner Sunday and then come back.
Wow. Sounds like a pretty good weekend.
Yeah, I don't hate it.
Yeah, sure you don't.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all the great stuff, all in one weekend.
And then the weekend after that, we have Mid-Mitten Con.
Yes.
And so that
you need to tell about that.
And
I don't get to go.
John doesn't get to go. I'm going to be driving up to mid-Michigan, Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And we're going to Mid-Mitten Con. That's going to be a huge event. They put on a fantastic charity event there. We'll have a tournament. We're going to have a Master Crafter coin. We're going to have, so many games. We've got Brightsword going on. We've got Free Blades Arena going on. We have Free Blades Encounters going on. There's a ton of stuff going on up there, and it's always super, super well attended. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be sad that you guys can't make it. Totally understand, though. I mean, you're just busting it out down here.
We did, we had Audrey and Heather at Miso's. We just had another event not too long ago, and then we have Griffin's Lair and then Gamescape out in California.
Right.
So I had to come off that list.
Sure.
I will not go 2 years in a row, so I'll be back next year.
Right.
2 years in a row, not going to Mid-Mitten. It's too cool an event.
Yeah. So if you haven't yet, jump into Mid-Mitten Con on Facebook or take a look at our page, and it's got some information on it.
There's a link there in Discord too.
Yeah. And you can get in there. I'd highly suggest coming out. It's going to be a great time, and it's going to be a lot of other Free Blades players there. So.
Yep.
All right, that's awesome. So today our main topic is going to be something that the World Builders and the Change Seekers, 2 of our top tier Patreon subscriber partners, came up with for us to talk about on the podcast. And that is kind of a history and an overview of each of the factions. So today we're going to start with, and I don't know if you guys know this, but this is John's favorite faction. This is Falkaar.
I guess that's true.
I'm not going to
just that's on record. I don't want to play favorites. I know my mom does with my sister, but I don't.
Yeah, but I think we all have, those factions that we really like and that we're super passionate about, and may have gotten us into this whole thing to begin with.
Sure.
I have that same thing with the Khazaric. We'll talk about them sooner or later. But today, let's start with who are the Falkaran.
And we also, talking about the origins of the fact from
absolutely. Let's
the game.
Let's talk a little bit about
how it all happened,
the lore first, and then let's talk a little bit about how they came about, because I think that's a really cool story too, right?
So, the Kingdom of Falkaar is the first of the Failure kingdoms to civilize. So the Failure people originate as what we know today as the Urdagar tribes, right? In the northwestern corner of the northern continent of Visartiel. That's their homeland. Now, many years ago, lore-wise, 1,000 years ago, mists of time, right? Back at the beginning.
Before recording.
2 tiny amoeba. They were Erdegar lands actually ranged much further south.
Much further.
Okay. All the way to the sea in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
And from where they are now on the map, but everybody knows and loves. And it is the Kryjan that shoved them north the first time.
Right.
Further, a little bit further north. And then when the Trazarites rebel against the Kryjan, the Trazarite Empire takes over the lands held by the Kryjan, and their high water mark in Falkaar is the Moonshadow Mountain Range.
Right.
Which is really all of Falkaar, because there was no Falkaar then.
Right.
It was tribe lands. And they shove the tribes into a smaller space by expanding north. Okay. And there are many conflicts over that time period.
Sure, they don't take it lightly.
No, they're not going to quite. But of course, the Trazarites are built for war, more technologically advanced, and it's a struggle that they, for a while, they win.
Right.
Okay. And 1,030 years ago, somewhere in there, a wolf tribesman who's captured by the Trazarites in one of these conflicts spends time in what is now Terena. It's a Trazarite town then. It's just Falkaar City now, but and sees the advantages of what we would call civilization from a military standpoint, from an agricultural standpoint, and recognizes that while it is, batter ass to stay in the saddle and live as a nomad and a hunter gatherer, whatever.
Right.
And I'm not a cultural anthropologist, so I'm probably going to use some term and not use it correctly. Okay.
We'll forgive you.
Fantasy barbarians, right? So he recognized that, and he gathers clans from some of the tribes, not all of them, and launches an attack on the Trazarites that will result in the Erdegar reconquering what is now Falkaar, the area from the Moonshadow Mountains down to the ocean.
Awesome.
A campaign that starts with taking what becomes Tlar Castle. There's no Barmar then, right?
Right. And Barmar is their capital.
It's the current capital of Falkaar. It was purpose-built by one of the early kings. They take what is now Tlar Castle. Corlar, I want to say, is its Trazarite name. And that is the Eyrie that the Parakir were operating out of. And a special breed of Parakir that can operate effectively in cold weather. So that story's on World Anvil.
It is.
Right? About the capture of the Eyrie.
It is. It's an awesome story.
And of course they're tribesmen then. So, he's a wolf tribesman. He's not a Falkaar because there was no Falkaar. He's crowned king later.
Yeah.
And so he and his allies, men and women of the Erdegar tribes, across several of the tribes, many clans from several of the tribes, conquer that and decide to settle there. And he makes all of the senior leaders barons. The initial nobility of Falkaar are those people who were his lieutenants in that campaign. And his number two was what is now, he helped capture the Archbarony of Tlar, what is now the Archbarony of Tlar,
right?
Which is that tower and the Parakir Eyrie. And that's why, that is the way it is today, and why there's an archbaron there and barons everywhere else.
Right.
Because he was the number two to the first king. So he's crowned in year one.
Right, because we use the Falkaar calendar.
Right. Yeah. When we decide to do that, you're going to make, whenever you pick what calendar you're going to generally work off of, you're going to make one piece of one culture very happy and everybody else mad.
Sure.
So whatever.
But you have to have a reference point somewhere. Otherwise, it's just a mess.
So the calendar we use, like right now in Phelan, is 1008.
Right.
Early 1008 or late 1007.
Well,
might be late
we've been
1007.
staying.
Yeah, we haven't decided yet. We didn't nail that down.
Yeah.
Now, that's something for another podcast.
That could be, yeah.
So somewhere in there, 1,000 something, early, 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. Because the Bright Sword War is coming, and one of the things that we're going to be doing going forward is we're going to be picking a spot in the calendar, nailing down what year it is, and then moving the calendar forward from that point.
Right.
With stories and lore.
Yeah, because up until now,
it's been nebulous.
It's been static.
Yeah, but within a small span. but
Yeah.
it keeps moving around.
Right.
And we want to tell a continuous narrative.
Yes. At some point, the clock's going to start spinning, and we're going to start pushing forward.
But the reason why let's say it's 1005. The reason why it's 1005 today is because 1005 years ago, this guy was crowned king.
Right.
Now, the Erdegar, that are still Erdegar at that time, resent this. It should have just been made Erdegar lands, and there was conflict over what to do when he conquered it. But those people that didn't come help, he didn't have them have a say.
Right.
So they're all like, yeah, have fun storming the castle. And then they had an opinion later, and he's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And it was because he was primarily motivated by his time as a prisoner, seeing the advantages.
Right.
So he had to listen to his kinsmen and kinswoman bad-mouthing him over, you're a stone dweller now, a pillow sleeper, you're weak and lame and whatever. Oh, yeah, but I have a kingdom, and I'm fat with gold. And,
And 1,000 years later, that kingdom stands.
Plumbing, yeah. And 1,000 years later, the kingdoms are still there. That's right. So that's the lore story of the kingdom of Falkaar.
Okay.
And today, Queen Jarissa is the ruler.
Yeah.
Barmar was purpose-built early on as their capital, built into a mountainside. Barmar means mountain gate in Faelish. The two other cities are Tirena on the western coast of the Inner Sea, and Lormouth, which is on the ocean,
Right.
And then there's the barony of Falthar, the barony of Jendal. That's where the Jendal Bladesister comes from. The barony of Caradal, that's where the Caradal Bladesister comes from. Tlar, which is where the Parakir comes from, and Delan, right?
Right.
And so these are where their nobles come from.
Sure.
As the leaders of these places. And the ones that are named that show up on the map, it's generally because they have a core stone.
Right.
Which you also learned from the Treasuries.
Yeah, and that's something across most of our map. If you see a city on there, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, there's a core stone there.
There's not one, for example, in Rakkenslat, which is the capital of the Rular.
Right.
For various reasons.
For various reasons.
Really like, Ulaanbaatar. Right?
Right. We'll talk about that when we get to the Grular. So what do you say are the core beliefs, the guiding culture of the Falkaran?
Okay, so well, first of all, religiously, they are Varanic,
right.
Meaning their priests translated the Erdegar totems into anthropomorphic gods sometime more than 1,000 years ago. That proselytizing was going on. And he bought into that. He was totally pragmatic. He was the original pragmatist. Wasn't super religious, wasn't an animist, wasn't any of those people. He just wanted life to be better for his people, and everything was driven by that desire. So he wasn't particularly religious himself, but people like religion. We had a crap some. Let's have some
stability there.
Yeah. So he recognized of his choices, it would be easier to build those temples and build that set of followings and try to keep their Erdegar mystical and animistic traditions.
Right.
And so he bought into all that and made room in his plan for these priests who are now their descendants, bishops and
right.
And friars and whatever in the countryside. So they follow the gods, but all 18, not just the 12, but they're a little bit more practical about that also, right?
And we're going to tell that story.
We're going to talk about that story too, yeah. So one of the things that people notice, they've seen a lot of Haradel, they haven't seen all the Falkaran knights yet.
Right.
So you see a knight of Vidnar, a knight of Tanar. Those are gods.
Those are Varanic
gods. The Falkaran worship those gods and goddesses also, but where the Haradellans tend to focus on the spiritual aspects, the Falkarans focus on the elemental aspects. So the Knight Immolator, that's coming out.
A Knight Immolator.
Yeah, what are we talking about, John? It's coming out on Black Friday. Is a Falkaran knight of the church that has fire magic as the elemental portion, whereas the lamp, Vidnar,
right.
Has Varanic rites as their magic, which is a spirit magic.
Spirit magic.
So the Falkaran knights are energy flavored, if I can say that. The Knight Defender is an earth knight.
Right.
The Parakir is a sky knight, an air knight.
Mm-hmm.
The Knight Mariner is a sea knight.
Right.
A water knight. Okay. The Night Immolator is a fire knight. There will also be ice.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Void.
Void.
Ooh.
Yeah, the Night Chancellor.
Ooh.
Just turn that stuff off. Yeah.
Ooh.
Stop doing that. Whatever you're doing, stop it. Night Chancellor, there's going to be and will there be a reality night? The answer is yes. Will you be able to recognize a reality night in the crowd? Probably not.
Kind of their shtick.
So, yeah, and where you have knights in Herodel who follow the churches of the 12 gods, but not the gods that would represent the the 3 rebel Gaul, right? The canon. The Falkaar and so make a distinction. So those 6 churches are there, and so there will also be,
knights that represent those as well.
Death knights. Shroud knights.
Shroud. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
if they're my favorite, I got to make them cooler, right?
yeah.
Jennifer had her day last episode.
She did.
She's not here. Should have been here.
Right. So how did we've kind of seen how Phelan developed out of this D&D world that you had put together as a teenager. How did the Falkarans come about out of that? What's their story, their genesis from that?
Yeah, I'm going to take you, speaking of mists of time, I need to take you back to the early mid-70s, right? So D&D breaks out onto the scene. D&D, interestingly, I'm going to show you this later, by the way, Matt, because I found it. D&D was not the first role-playing game I ever played. The first role-playing game I ever played was called On Guard.
On Guard.
Right. It was a booklet published by Games Designers Workshop, which we were all fans of. I was a board gamer.
Yeah.
And I mean old school board gamer. I mean like a Euro gamer like today. Hex map, thousands of counters.
Little punch counters, yeah.
Yeah, right. Little
Avalon Hill.
Squares. Well, we're going to talk about Avalon Hill because they have a role here. And they have a role in development of Falkaar. We'll get to that.
That's cool.
So when D&D came on the scene, because all On Guard was dice roll. You kind of went through the career of a musketeer in what I want to say, 17th century France.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
18th century France. You're a musketeer, and you make certain decisions. It's one of those books you kind of move through and make decisions, roll dice on the table, get gold and influence and skills, and duel other people playing out of the same book.
That's cool.
But you didn't play it on the tabletop, right? I found my copy of it.
Oh.
I'll show it to you. Anyway, so when D&D hit, that was amazing.
Right.
We're going to put figures on the table, and we're going to have
it's a whole new world.
Moria, right? Because we're all Tolkien fans. We're
right.
going to have chasms and dragons and whatever, Balrogs. And but then those original books talked about how to portray a wilderness setting for your role players. And they talked about where you could get map resources. And I went and got my copy off the shelf of Avalon Hill's Outdoor Survival.
Oh.
Okay. And Outdoor Survival is you're lost in some national park or out in the wilderness, and you're interacting with the flora and the fauna, and you're doing whatever, And it has this beautiful hex map, but like with all these different terrain settings, a swamp and a woods and a mountain range and a desert and whatever. So your character in the game, your pieces in the game can move through this landscape. And the very first country I ever made was, I'm going to say it wrong, Arakema, which is America backwards. I'm 14, dude. Nobody was doing this.
No judgment here. There are still game companies that are doing that.
So it was kind of a meal. And I wasn't. The good news is I wasn't satisfied.
Right.
So back in the day, you could get, you still can, but you would get this blank hex map, and I drew a country, and it had it was like a country, a kingdom that had all these things on the periphery, the big swamp and the mountain range and the big chasm and the rift, all those things that were part of fantasy at the time, everything from Sword of Shannara and Tolkien and, Stephen Donaldson,
right.
The things we were reading at the time. And so they were all recognizable names, it's just like I read a Princess Bride, the fire swamp, So the Mountains of Mist, oh, yeah, okay. Shadow Mountains, whatever, the Forest of Death, And so you had all that, and that wasn't satisfying because Tolkien inspired a generation to say, don't be satisfied with just naming a bunch of stuff. Let me give it a history.
Right.
It's called that in that language. And where did that come from? And why trace it down? So that became Falkaar. right? The very first, the kingdom the adventurers left to go to the borders to do their adventuring, to dungeons, because it was all dungeons.
Sure.
Right? There's an excuse to go into an underground complex that made zero sense from an engineering standpoint, but it had all these crazy places to go. You know, it had,
Right.
and possibly deep pits and underwater lakes and 50 levels. What were you doing down there? What was it for?
Right.
Oh, who cares?
All this
Spell
loot that just
spell rogues there, and all they're doing is sitting around playing cards, waiting for some adventure to eat.
right.
So it was old. It was the old of the old school.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept adding on. I kept adding on to it, and there's generations to it, which I think you've seen a couple, right?
I have.
When I went and expanded the world to add, at the time, the other traditional fantasy races,
Right.
like everybody did. I had to have my dwarves and my elves and my whatever, not D&D's, Tolkien's, right? And then of course D&D did the same thing,
Sure.
right? So you had to have a place for these people to be from. And then you had enemies on the other side of them, hobgoblins and ogres and whatever else is. And at some point I had that map, and I wasn't happy with that because it was somebody else's bad guys.
Yeah.
I had to have my own bad guys. So wipe that clean, start over, take a bunch of things I liked, get rid of the things I don't like. And that's where I started making that first language.
Awesome.
Right? And so Falkaar was the core of what I had. I had more built up on Falkaar than anything else. Castles and people and backgrounds and stories. So that Falkaar language was the first language I did.
Right.
And then as each thing, which we'll talk about later, as each thing got built on, I had to add more.
Sure. Now you say this, and talk about how that all started with Falkaar as the core, but the game didn't get Falkarans first.
No, but didn't we talk about why the first four factions?
We absolutely did, but when did the Falkarans come about in the game? When did we get that faction?
They were the second Kickstarter.
They were the second Kickstarter
faction, right? We released with 4.
Mm-hmm.
We had, because of Fiend of the Forest, we had more Erdogar models than we had Falkarans. And so it was easier because we did, like I said in that other podcast, we were in the hotel. We released at Origins 2012.
Right.
June. Okay. And August sometime, mid-August, we were at Gen Con pressing the button to launch our first Kickstarter.
Right.
Because Kickstarter was new.
Sure.
To us. Yeah. And we did the Erdogar first because we wanted to have the shortest distance between. We didn't know if we're going to succeed.
Right.
I mean, even more of a step off the deep end than now. Now, you can control that a lot better.
You can. You've got a history of what's going and what's not back then.
And the game had only been out for 2 months. We had no idea if those fans were going to want another faction that fast either,
right.
Let alone new people, right? But it was successful, But we did have that. We're sitting in the hotel room, the laptop sitting on the desk in one of the guys' hotel rooms. Press the go button. Everybody's like, and then the when we were telling people about it beforehand,
sure,
did your marketing, and we had at the con downstairs at the con, check out our Kickstarter flyers,
right, right.
And so the Erdogar were first, and that was successful, and so we only had. I think when we launched the Erdogar Kickstarter, the only models for the Falkarans we had already made were the Forester and the Witch Cat.
Cool.
No, that's not right. The Fire Wizard also. Fire was a very early concept because he was a character of a major player in the Brightsword War.
Right, right.
And that was, we said in that last podcast we were going to do a role-playing game first and change our minds, right? So we had that model. So we were closer than others, but really we had made more models for that straight up than we did for anything else we had done so far. So they were Kickstarter 2.
Okay. Well, tell me about each faction originally had a leader and a caster. So tell me about the leader and the caster for the Falkaran and where they fit in that culture.
Okay, sure. So Jarav Corsar, the first king, as we said, was a pragmatist, was copying other people's successes.
Sure.
And the Trazarites had beaten the Crygen Empire on the backs of their innovations in steel manufacture and sword fighting. The blade schools, the blade masters, right? The Sakazit. And so he instituted a modified version of that system inside Falkaar. So each of the baronies has their own blade school.
Each of the baronies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for example, the reason why the Blade Sister fights two-handed, hybrid, fights both-handed with a longsword. Sometimes one hand, sometimes you two hands. That's why she's D8 plus 1 damage, right? But she is from the Caradal Blade School, which teaches that sort of the same fighting. That's where the Black Rose went to school.
Ah.
So you look at the Black Rose, what style of fighting does she use? She has the same basic skill set.
Right.
A hybrid longsword user, no shield.
Right.
It's because she can switch between hands, stay light on her feet, and use some of the talents that are based on it. Stay, even more so than the Caradal Blade Sister, because she's armor 4. So the Jendal Blade School developed their own fighting style around a purpose-built weapon, right? The Caradal Blade School is just around a longsword.
Right.
But the Jendal Smiths invent the Kolakar, designed specifically to counter the Sakazin.
Ah, gotcha.
Right?
So that is a purpose-built weapon, and that school specifically teaches with that weapon.
Yes.
Okay.
The only one that does.
Awesome. And
Rules-wise. Yeah.
right. So that's their leader. How about their caster? It's a fire wizard.
Well, okay, so the Moyakat, right, which you can find information about in Free Blades Unsanctioned, the secret wizard council of wizards.
That's some hotness.
That watches over energy magic and its possible abuses. Traditionally draws one member from each of the major nations. And there's a tradition of them drawing their fire wizard from Falkaar.
Okay.
So the fire school in Tirana is world-renowned in terms of teaching
right.
Casters the use of fire magic.
So Falkaar doesn't just use fire magic, of course.
Yeah, no faction uses, the entire population only uses one kind of magic.
Right. But they're
known for it.
They're known for it.
Yeah.
So that's why it ended up as their caster.
Yeah.
All right. So we're running a little low on time here. We're just a little over what we were last week, but I got one more question that I want to ask. What can we expect from Falkaar in the future?
Tons of goodness, because I favor them, and too bad, Jen.
That does go without saying.
So, well, first, one of the things we have to explore, okay, is that we don't have all the blade schools covered.
Right.
We don't have all the knight types covered. So there's 9 knight types.
Yeah.
Right. And so we got to cover those, and we have like 5. So we need the ice, the void, the other ones that we don't have covered. And we don't have all of their military covered yet either.
Right.
Because there would be people in their military senior to and in charge of people like the pikemen.
Sure.
But we've covered a lot, though. I think about it. A lot of what we intended to do with Falkaar is because we also have their demon hunters.
We do have their demon hunters.
Yeah. You take a Shadow Hunter leader with his Genkar companion, 2 foresters and 2 witch cats, and you're an Aegis, right? You're
right.
Their standard demon hunting unit. So I would have to think about what we would do, because right now my list is all the rest of the knights.
And we have one of those nights coming out, like we talked about a little bit earlier on Black Friday, and that is the
Knight Immolator.
And that is the Fire Knight. And I think maybe we could put up a picture of that.
Sure. Yep, let's do that
in this podcast to kind of tease that out, just like we did with the Moon Talon.
Yeah. So. A knight that already comes with a flaming sword.
That's awesome.
There's a story about where they get them.
There is, and it's a cool story. I've read that story.
Fun story. It was done in cooperation with a Patreon subscriber.
Right, one of our world builders.
One of our world builders. Yeah. Who did a great job of matching up. And that's when the magic really happens. If you have like your idea, and your idea doesn't really have a home in Phelan, we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, that's a little harder. If you are a fan of Phelan, and you want to take that story just the way you understand it to be to the next level, then you get something like the Knight Immolator story.
Right.
Where you're fit yourself in the background, and like if you wanted to take Star Trek and you decide your thing was going to be to turn the Federation evil, there's plenty of places for evil in that background without, I don't need another story about how Starfleet Command is taken over by aliens. Okay. But if you say, I want to bring in this race that they encounter that does these things and totally fits what we want Starfleet to interact with.
Right.
Same thing with Phelan. If I say I'm already a fan, I know the lore. I want to take the next step and be part of that. Is always the best fit.
And that is something that the world builders get to do. Yeah. So if you're interested in that, make sure to go to our Patreon page. That's DGS Games.
Zach, our newest world
builder. Zach, our world builder. That's patreon.com/DGS Games. So, John, I think that's all we have time for. Okay. That was an awesome talk. There's always more questions about the background.
We can be on for the
exactly. But in the meantime, guys, thank you for listening. If you have any comments or if you have any suggestions, please leave those in comments wherever it is that you're listening to or watching this. And until next time, we'll see you around the table.
Spike and win.